Chapter 14 of the Practice of the Love of Jesus Christ by St. Alphonsus Ligouri. Love bears all things. Those who love Jesus Christ bear all things for Jesus Christ, especially illness, poverty, and contempt. In chapter 5, we spoke of the virtue of patience in general, but now we shall deal with certain matters where patience is especially called for. Father Balthazar Alvarez said that Christians should not think they have made any progress until they had succeeded in holding fast in their heart the sorrows, poverty, and scorn suffered by Jesus Christ, so as to endure with loving patience all pain, sorrow, poverty, and scorn for the sake of Jesus Christ. In the first place, let us speak of the pains and infirmities of the body, which, when borne with patience, win for us a great crown of merit. St. Vincent de Paul said, "If we only knew what precious treasure is contained in sickness, we would greet it with the same joy as we do the greatest blessings." Hence the saint himself, though he was constantly afflicted by so many ailments that he could often find no rest by night or day, bore them so peacefully and with such a serene expression, without ever complaining, that he seemed to have nothing wrong with him. How edifying it is to see a sick person bearing an illness with a tranquil look on his face, as did St. Francis de Sales. When he was ill, he simply explained the problem to the doctor, obeying him without fail by taking all the prescribed medicines, however unpleasant, and then he remained at peace, never complaining about his sufferings. How different this is from some people who never stop complaining at the slightest discomfort, and who would like to have all their relatives and friends cluster around to sympathize with their troubles. By contrast, St. Teresa exhorted her nuns, "Sisters, learn to suffer something for the love of the Lord, without letting everybody know about it." On one Good Friday, Jesus Christ presented the Venerable Father L. de la Pont with so much physical pain that every part of his body felt its own particular torment. He told a friend about this bitter suffering, but afterward he so regretted it that he vowed never again to reveal his sufferings to anyone. I say Jesus Christ presented him, because the saints consider the sicknesses and pain that God sends them as presents.
What is wrong with this?
It's a double yoke.
We should enter this into the fair sometime.
One day, St. Francis of Assisi lay on his bed in excruciating pain. A companion who was assisting him said, "Father, pray God to ease your suffering and not to lay so heavy a hand upon you." On hearing this, the saint instantly jumped out of bed and knelt down to thank God for his sufferings. Then, turning to his companion, he said, "Listen, if I did not know that you said what you did out of simplicity, I would wish never to see you again." Some sick persons will say, "I don't mind suffering this illness so much as the fact that I can't go to church to make my devotions, to take communion or hear Mass. I can't go to choir to say the office with my brethren. I can't celebrate Mass. I can't even pray because my head is so racked with pain that I feel about to faint." But wait, tell me, please, why do you want to go to church or to choir? Why do you want to receive communion or say or hear Mass? Is it to please God? But God is pleased now, not by your saying the office or going to communion or hearing Mass, but by your staying patiently in this bed and suffering the pain of this illness. But you don't want to hear that. Clearly, you are not seeking to do what God pleases, but pleases God, but what pleases you. John of Avila wrote to a priest who was complaining in this way, "My friend, don't go adding up all the things you would be doing if you were well, but be content to remain sick as long as it pleases God. If you seek the will of God, what does it matter to you whether you are healthy or sick? You say, you can't even pray because you can barely hold up your head. Well, very well. You can't meditate, but why can't you make acts of resignation to the will of God? If you did, that would be the finest prayer you could ever say, embracing with love all the pain that afflicts you. That was what St. Vincent de Paul did. When he was gravely ill, he would gently place himself in the presence of God without forcing his mind to concentrate on any particular subject. All he would do was from time to time make acts now of love, now of trust, now of thanksgiving, and then still more often of resignation. Whenever the pain increased, St. Francis de Sales said, "Sufferings in themselves are terrifying, but in the light of God's will they are lovely and delightful. You can't pray. You can't pray? What finer prayer could there be than to look occasionally at the crucified Jesus Christ and to offer him the pain you are suffering, joining the little that you endure to the enormous torments that he suffered on the cross? A holy woman once lay bedridden, afflicted with many troubles. When her maid handed her a crucifix and told her to pray to God to deliver her from the pain, she replied, "How can you ask me to come down from the cross while I hold in my hands a crucified God? God forbid. I want to suffer for him who chose to suffer for me and pain much worse than mine." This was precisely what Jesus Christ said to St. Teresa when she was sick and greatly afflicted. He appeared to her all covered with wounds, and then said to her, "Daughter, look at the bitterness of my sufferings, and consider whether yours can be compared with mine." And so the saint used to say, when she was in distress from her infirmities, "When I think of all the ways the Lord suffered, though he was completely innocent, I don't know how I could get into my head to complain of my sufferings." For 38 years, St. Lidwine suffered continuously from many diseases, gout in her feet and hands and shingles, but because she always had before her eyes the sufferings of Jesus Christ, she was lively and cheerful, even though confined to bed. Similarly, when St. Joseph of Leonessa, a Capuchin, had to undergo an amputation by a surgeon, his brethren wanted to tie him down with ropes to prevent him from moving because of the intense pain. But he took hold of the crucifix and said, "Ropes? Why do I need ropes? Look who is tying me down to suffer in peace all pain for his love." And so he endured the amputation without complaining. St. Jonas the martyr, after spending a night encased in ice by order of the tyrant, said the next morning that he had never had a more restful night, because he had pictured to himself Jesus hanging on the cross, and so his sufferings, compared with those of Christ, had seemed more like caresses than torments. Oh, how much merit can be gained just by patiently enduring sickness! Father Balthazar Alvarez had a vision of the great glory of God that God had prepared for a devout nun for suffering through a sickness with great patience. He was told that she had earned more merit in the 8 months of her illness than some other pious nuns do in many years. It is by patiently enduring the pains of sickness that we win a large, perhaps the largest part of the crown that God is preparing for us in paradise. That is precisely what was revealed to St. Lidwine. After suffering through so many painful diseases that, as mentioned above, she wished to die a martyr for Jesus Christ. But one day, as she was sighing after this martyrdom, she saw a beautiful crown that was not quite finished, and she understood that it was being readied for herself. In her longing to see it completed, she begged the Lord to increase her sufferings. The Lord answered her prayer by sending some soldiers who brutally mistreated her, not just with insults, but with beatings. Then an angel appeared to her with the crown completed, and told her that those last blows had added to the crown the jewels that were lacking, and shortly thereafterward she died. How welcome and sweet are pain and ignominy to souls that ardently love Jesus Christ. That is why the holy martyrs went so gladly to meet the rack, the iron hooks, the burning metal plates, and the meat axes. As he was being tortured by the tyrant, the martyr St. Procopius said, "Torment me as much as you like, but know that for those who love Jesus Christ nothing is sweeter than to suffer for his love." Another martyr, St. Gordianus, told the tyrant who was threatening to have him killed, "You threaten me with death, but my only great regret is that I cannot die more than once for my Jesus Christ." These saints speak that way because they were insensible to pain. Did these saints speak that way because they were insensible to pain or simply stupid? No, St. Bernard replies, it was not stupidity but love that did this. They were not insensible. They could very well feel the pain of being inflicted. They could very well feel the pain being inflicted on them. But since they loved God, they thought it a great gain to suffer everything and lose everything, including life itself, for the love of God. In time of sickness, especially, we must be ready to accept death and the death that pleases God. We all must die, and our life must end in our last illness. Though we do not know what our last illness will be, so in every illness let us prepare ourselves to embrace the death that God has destined for us. A sick person may say, "Yes, but I have committed so many sins and have done no penance. I would like to live, not for the sake of living, but to make some satisfaction to God before I die." But tell me, my friend, how do you know that if you go on living you will do penance, and not do worse than before? Right now you may well hope that God has forgiven you. What finer penance can there be than to accept death with resignation, if God so wills it? Dying young at the age of 23, St. Aloysius Gonzaga cheerfully embraced death with this reflection. "Just now," he said, "I find myself, I hope, in the grace of God. Afterwards I don't know what may become of me, so I die happy, if now it pleases God to call me to the next life." Father John of Avila felt that everyone, even a person of middling virtue, who was properly disposed, should desire death to escape the danger in which we always live on this earth, of sinning and losing the grace of God. Besides, owing to our natural weakness, we cannot live in this world without committing at least venial sins. From this standpoint, at any rate, we should cheerfully embrace death, so that we may never offend God any more. Besides, if we truly love God, we should ardently long to see him and love him with all our strength in paradise, which no one can do perfectly in this life. But unless death opens the door for us, we cannot enter that blessed homeland of heaven. This is why St. Augustine, who was so in love with God, exclaimed, "Would that I could die, O Lord, that I might see you. Lord, let me die, because unless I die, I cannot see you and love you face to face." Second, we must practice patience in enduring poverty. There is certainly a great need for patience when we lack temporal goods. St. Augustine says, "He who does not have God has nothing. He who has God has everything." Those who have God are united to his divine will, find every good thing.
Hi, Dad. I need to make breakfast.
Okay. All right.
So I was waiting for the stove because Katie was using it.
Have every good thing. Here is St. Francis barefooted, dressed in sackcloth, and poor in every way, who by saying, "My God and my all," proved to be happier than all the monarchs of the earth. Those are called poor who desire goods they do not have. But those who desire nothing and are content with their poverty are thoroughly rich. St. Paul speaks of such people as having nothing and yet possessing everything. The true lovers of God have nothing and have everything. Since when they lack worldly goods, they say, "My Jesus, you alone are enough for me." And with this they rest content. Not only did the saints have patience in their poverty, but they sought to be stripped of everything in order to live detached from everything and united only to God. If we do not have the courage to renounce all the goods of this world, at least let us be content with the state of life where the Lord wants us to be. And let us not be solicitous for earthly riches, but for heavenly ones, which are immeasurably greater and last forever. And let us persuade ourselves of what St. Teresa says, "The less we have here, the more we shall enjoy there." St. Bonaventure said that an abundance of temporal goods was nothing more than a bird-lime for the soul, to prevent it from flying to God. And on the other hand, St. John Climacus said that poverty is a road on which to travel to God without hindrance. The Lord said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." In the other Beatitudes, heaven is promised in the future to the meek and to the pure of heart, but to the poor heaven, that is, heavenly joy, is promised, even in this life. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Yes, for even in this life the poor enjoy a foretaste of paradise. The poor in spirit means those who are not just poor on earthly goods, but who do not even desire them. As the Apostle Paul says, "But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these." "O blessed poverty," exclaimed St. Lawrence Justiniani, "which possesses nothing and fears nothing. It is always joyous and always abundant, since it turns all the troubles it has to the advantage of the soul." St. Bernard writes, "The covetous person hungers for earthly things like a beggar. The poor person despises them like a lord. The miser is always as ravenous as a beggar. because he never manages to sate himself with the goods he desires. By contrast, the poor man, like a rich lord of all, scorns them because he desires nothing. One day Jesus Christ said to Blessed Angela of Foligno, "If poverty were not a great good, I would not have chosen it for myself, nor left it to my chosen ones as their portion." And, in fact, it is because the saints saw Jesus poor that they have so loved poverty. St. Paul says, "But those who want to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Unhappy creatures who, for the wretched goods of this world, forfeit an infinite good which is God." So St. Basil the Martyr was quite right when the Emperor Licinius proposed to make him his chief priest if he would abandon Jesus Christ. He was right, I say, to reply, "Tell the emperor that if he were willing to give me his whole kingdom, he couldn't give me as much as he would be taking away from me by making me lose God." So let us be content with God and with the things he gives us, rejoicing to see ourselves poor when we lack what we would like to have. It is not poverty that is reckoned a virtue, says St. Bernard, but the love of poverty. Many are poor, but because they do not love their poverty, they have no merit. That is why St. Bernard says that the virtue of poverty consists not in being poor, but in loving poverty. And religious persons, in particular, who have taken a vow of poverty, should have this love of poverty. Many religious, says St. Bernard, wish to be poor so long as they want for nothing. As St. Francis de Sales says, they want the honor of poverty, but not its inconveniences. To such people, the saying of the Blessed Salomia, a nun of St. Clare, replies, "A nun who wishes to be poor and then complains when she lacks something will be laughed to scorn by angels and by men." That is not how good nuns behave. They love their poverty above all riches. When the daughter of the Emperor Maximilian II, a discalced nun of St. Clare, known as Sister Margaret of the Cross, appeared before her brother, the Archduke Albert, in a patched-up habit, as he voiced his astonishment, as if this were not becoming to her noble birth. But she answered him, "Brother, I am happier with this rag than all the monarchs with their purple robes." St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi said, "How fortunate the religious who, detached from everything by means of holy poverty, can say, 'The Lord is my chosen portion.' My God, you are my portion and all my good." Having received many donations from a certain merchant, St. Teresa sent him word that his name was written in the book of life, and that as a sign of this, the things of this earth would fail him. And in fact, the merchant went bankrupt and remained poor until his death. St. Aloysius Gonzaga said that there could be no surer sign that a person is numbered among the elect than to see him God-fearing, at the same time racked by travail and desolation in this world. In a way, it is yet another feature of holy poverty to be deprived in this life of relatives and friends by death, and here, too, in this we must exercise a great deal of patience. Some people, when they lose a parent or a friend, can find no peace. They shut themselves up in their room to weep, and abandoning themselves to their sadness, become so impatient that they become impossible to deal with. I would ask those persons, when they grieve in this way and shed such storms of tears, whom are they trying to please? God? Not God, because God wants us to resign ourselves to his will. The departed soul, once again, no. The departed soul? Once again, no. If the soul is lost, she hates you and your tears. If she has been saved and already in heaven, she wishes you to thank God for herself. If she is in purgatory, she desires you to help her with your prayers and to become a saint, so that one day she may have you for a companion in paradise. What good then is all that weeping? The Venerable Father Joseph Carriacciolo at Theatine had lost a brother, and one day he was with other family members who would not stop crying. "Come on," he said, "let us save those tears for a worthier cause, to weep for the death of Jesus Christ, who has been to us a father, a brother, and a husband, and who Come on, he said, let us save those tears for a worthier cause, to weep for the death of Jesus Christ, who has been to us a father, a brother, and a husband, and who died for love of us. On such occasions we must act like Job, who, when he heard the news that his children had been killed, completely conformed himself to God's will, and said, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. What has happened was pleasing to God, and it pleases me too. May he be blessed forever. Third, we must practice patience and show our love for God by peacefully suffering the scorn we receive from others. As soon as souls give themselves completely to God, God himself causes or permits others to despise and persecute them. One day an angel appeared to the blessed Henry Suso and said to him, Henry, up to now you have mortified yourself in your own way. From now on you shall be mortified as it will please others. The next day, as he looked out a window, he saw a dog shaking and tearing a rag that it had in its mouth. Then he heard a voice saying to him, that is how you have to be torn by the mouths of men. Blessed Henry went down into the street and got the rag, which he kept for his own comfort in the time of trials that had been foretold to him. Affronts and injuries are a source of delight that the saints long for and seek out. St. Philip Neri spent 30 years in Rome at the house of St. Jerome, where he suffered a great deal of mistreatment from certain individuals. But he refused to leave the house and moved to the new oratory of the Chiesa Nuova, which he had founded, where his beloved sons had already moved and were inviting him to join them. Until he found himself obliged to go there by an express command from the Pope. St. John of the Cross was told he needed a change of air for an illness that later carried him off to the grave.
Where are you going, Mom? Could you lay her down in the next half an hour?
Mom, where are you going?
Get an ultrasound on my arm, see if it worked last week.
Oh, see ya.
Okay, bye-bye. Yet he turned down a more comfortable monastery where the prior was a close friend of his, and chose instead a poor convent where the prior was his enemy, a man, in fact, who for a long time had practically to his dying day despised him and mistreated him in many ways, even forbidding the other monks to visit him. This is how far the saints go to seek out insults. St. Teresa wrote this memorable maxim: anyone who aspires to perfection must be aware of saying, they did that to me for no reason. If you don't want to bear a cross except one supported by reason, then perfection is not for you. When St. Peter Martyr complained that he had been unjustly imprisoned without having done anything wrong, the crucified Lord gave him a celebrated answer. And what evil have I done that I had to hang on this cross and suffer and die for men? When they have been insulted, the saints derive great consolation from the ignominy that Jesus Christ endured for us. On being asked by his wife how he managed to bear so patiently all the insults he received, even from his own servants, St. Eleazar replied, I turned to look on Jesus, who was despised and rejected, and I see that the affronts to me are nothing compared with what he suffered for me, and so God gives me strength to bear it all patiently. In a word, insults and outrages, poverty, pain, and everything kind of tribulation befalling a soul that does not love God are only occasions for driving it further from God. But when they befall a soul in love with God, they are motives for clinging more closely to God and loving him more. Many waters cannot quench love. However many and grievous the sufferings may be, not only do they not quench the flames of love, they fan them higher in a heart that loves nothing else but God. But why does God burden us with so many crosses and take pleasure in seeing us pained and persecuted and mistreated by the world? Is he perhaps a tyrant whose cruel nature makes him enjoy seeing us suffer? No, God is not a tyrant, nor does he have a cruel nature. He is all pity and love for us. Suffice it to say that he loved us to the point of dying for us. He does not rejoice to see us suffer, but that is for our own good, so that by suffering we may be freed from the punishment we would otherwise suffer in the next life for the debts we contracted with divine justice. He rejoices in our suffering, so that we may detach ourselves from the sensory pleasures of this world. When a mother wants to wean her baby, She puts gall on her breasts so that the child may find nursing abhorrent. God rejoices in our suffering in hopes that by enduring it with patience and resignation, we may give him some proof of our love. Finally, he rejoices in it so that we may win greater glory in paradise. These are the reasons, all rooted in pity and love. These are the reasons, all rooted in pity and love, why the Lord enjoys seeing us suffer. Let us bring this chapter to an end. If we really wish to practice holy patience in all our tribulations, we must persuade ourselves that all trials come from the hands of God, either directly or indirectly through other human beings. And so when we see ourselves in distress, we must thank the Lord and accept with a cheerful mind whatever he orders for our welfare. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God. Furthermore, when we are afflicted by some trial, it helps to look at hell, which we once deserved. For compared with hell, any other suffering will always be infinitely smaller. But to suffer with patience all pain, disgrace, and adversity, prayer is more helpful than any reflection. God's help, which comes after prayer, will give us the strength that we do not have. That is what the saints did. They commended themselves to God, and so overcame all torments and persecutions. Prayers of love and affection. Lord, I am persuaded that without patient suffering I cannot win the crown of paradise. David said, "From him is my patience." I say the same. Patience in suffering must be your gift to me. I resolve to accept in peace all my tribulations, but no sooner do they arrive than I grow sad and dismayed. And if I suffer without merit and without love, because I do not know how to suffer them so as to please you. O my Jesus, through the merits of your patience in suffering, so much pain for the love of me, grant me the grace to bear crosses for your love. I love you with all my heart, my dear Redeemer. I love you, my sovereign good. I love you, my love, worthy of infinite love. Above all other evil, I repent of whatever displeasure I have caused you. I promise to accept with patience all the trials that you send me. But from you I hope for your help to carry out my promise, and especially to suffer in peace the pains of my agony and death. O Mary, my Queen, beg for me true resignation to whatever remains for me to suffer in life and in death.